Well, good. I really appreciate everybody coming out tonight. It was a beautiful spring day, a little bit of rain, not as much rain as yesterday, which is wonderful. But welcome to the Graystone Society and the National Iron and Steel Heritage Museum. I'm the president, Scott Houston, and welcome you tonight to our lecture series. And tonight we'll be discussing, Liberty ships, particularly the John Brown, and we're very excited to have Larry here. He's probably very excited to be here as well. But it's for us, the Liberty Ship program, obviously, with the connections of steel making and the plate steel and the hull plate that we turned out. Have to get the direct connections maybe to the Liberty plate projects, but I don't know. We were more of a specialty steel maker, but the 120 mill was built in 1941, and so that did a lot of war effort drives. That was a brand new mill through the war and turned out. And I believe we got the Navy E for production as well. But we're very happy to have you tonight to talk about the John Brown. Our Liberty ship model is behind Ivory over here on the sill, and that's the Rebecca Lukens. And Rebecca Lukens, the company and the connection to war production and the naming of a ship, and it was appropriate to have a non-fighting ship named after Rebecca because of her Quaker connections. And that ship, I believe, was I forgot the builder's plate that you gave us, is Pensacola, Florida, was, I believe, where she was built in March of '44, and so this would have been her 70th anniversary of launching in '44. I'm not sure how long she was a Liberty ship for, and the Rebecca Lukens, because then she became one of, I think there were six that were selected for forward aircraft recovery units in the Pacific, and had helicopters fly off their front bow, and they were named after generals. General Daig was I believe, the ship that the Rebecca Lukens became. But a fascinating story in its own right, but we're not here to talk about the Rebecca Lukens in the history, and we encourage people to do research on that, as we have done as well. But tonight we are here to talk about the John Brown, the SS John Brown, and its great history and in Baltimore. And I just must plug real quick that we are very excited to go down to Baltimore. I believe it's May 15th, 2 weeks from today. And so hope everybody has an opportunity to go down and visit the John Brown, and then I believe we'll be doing not on the Brown, but a little cruise of the harbor. So again, this is nice to have Larry here to give us a history of the John Brown in anticipation of the trip, and as well to commemorate Rebecca Lukens launching 7 years ago. So again, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I feel it's a privilege for me to be here tonight. My background with Liberty ships, I ran tugboats on Guam for a year and a half. We had a lot of Victory ships coming in. They were built toward the end of World War II, and a lot of shipping companies bought them up and used them. And then one day this old ship came in. I mean, it was a rust bucket. And the craft master said, "Now that's a Liberty." Still didn't sink in. I didn't even think to look at the name of it. Anyway, a couple businessmen had bought that ship. They filled the cargo holds full of scrap steel. It was on its way to Japan, where they would scrap the cargo and the ship. So she was making her last run. Then when I was in Vietnam, I was on a very small cargo ship. And every 2 weeks we delivered cargo to a ship called the Two to Wheel. It was a repair ship for gasoline diesel engines. They had a lot of river boats, swift boats, and all that. And I got to know some of the engineers, and one of the guys said, "Well, Larry, did you ever see the engine in this thing?" And like a dummy, I said, "Well, what is it, diesel?" "No, it's steam." And I got to get down in the engine room and see a triple expansion steam engine, 3 stories tall. I thought, what have we here? Well, anyway, I put the Liberties out of my mind, get out of the Navy, moved on with my life, and then a neighbor was supposed to come down on one of the Living History cruises out of Baltimore. Make a long story short, about a dozen of us came down, September of '06. The cruise did not sail. They had a hurricane come through the next day, or the day before. So we come through the gate. They said, "You can come on board. You can have the breakfast, have the lunch, whatever. The actors are here. We're not leaving the pier, but they will run the engine. You can tour the ship, whatever." What they gave us for choice, you can either donate your ticket, or you can get a full refund, or you can schedule for a future cruise. I thought, they can't be any fairer than that. So I met a gal named Ann Kimball on there. She was part of the crew, and I said, "Ann, how much money are you losing today?" And she said, "Between $35,000 and $40,000. So like a dummy, it's all her fault. I pulled out this and I wrote a $100 donation check and I gave it to her. Little did I know she turned it into a membership. So now I'm getting all the propaganda and everything else. I started volunteering on there and I've kind of been on there ever since. I do a little bit of everything on there. The business card you saw in the pack of 3 there, the secretary said, well, what do you want on your card? I said, put docent. Now, most people don't know what a docent is. A museum term is like a guide or something like that. But that's what I'm most proud of, because I like being at the Inner Harbor when people come aboard, just joking with them, handing out free tickets, you know, the whole routine. But I like talking with people. Well, let's get into it here. See if I can't screw this up. There's a Liberty ship. Now, they didn't really have the term Liberty ship right away, because what was happening at that time, the German U-boats were really playing havoc on the ships that were supplying England. I mean, England had shipyards, but now they can't build ships at night. If they left the lights on, there's your target there. So they were hurting, and the Germans were sinking these ships faster than anybody could build them. So they approached our country, and they said, can you build us some ships? So we said, sure. What do you got in mind? Well, what they had in mind was this ocean class of ship. It's a little bit different than what became the Liberty. The sizes were different. You notice the stack is just a straight stack. Now ours is a little bit different. But we built them. Now, we did not follow their blueprints exactly. If we're building them here, we got to know several things. First of all, what can our steel companies supply us with? In other words, how big a plate? Raw materials, what are we dealing with? It might be different in England. England certainly would have been using the British standard system for their plumbing lines. Well, you know, we're Americans. We don't deal with that. Of course, the rest of the world does, but we don't. So we had to deal with our own plumbing type sizes and all that. So we altered it a little bit, but we built them. Anyway, that was a start. We bailed them out with that. The Brits come up with a design there. They had some wooden hull things and all that stuff. And blueprints. Now, you know, they call them blueprints because they were blue with white lettering. That's what it was. And then later on, they come up with white with blue lettering in the whole routine. But those are honest-to-God blueprints right there. Now, the question came up, well, what are you going to power this thing with? Well, the good choice at that time would have been steam turbines. They were much faster and all that stuff. And I'm sure they probably asked us about it, and we said, no, we can't get turbines, because all the companies building steam turbines are contracted for Navy ships and stuff like that. We can't get them. So the Brits said, well, all right, triple expansion steam. Now, how big is it? Well, if you're standing here, you'd be about that tall. This thing's 3 stories tall. It's a monster. Weighs 144 tons, 2,500 horsepower. This is toward the back of the ship. The propeller shaft would bolt onto that, so it was direct to the propeller. You run the engine forward, you're going forward. Reverse it, you're going to reverse. Pretty good system. Now, the highlight for the triple expansion was probably around 1885. When the Titanic was built, they had triple expansion 4 cylinders, but they also had a steam turbine for the center screw. And what they would do, they'd run the 2 recips for the left and the right port and starboard screw, and then they'd take the exhaust from those steam engines, put it into the turbine, but the turbine only went forward. Is that a problem? Well, maybe not. That center screw could develop quite a bit of horsepower. The problem was, when the Titanic was coming into that iceberg, and if you saw the Titanic movie, you know, they want to go full reverse. Well, okay, they could do that fairly quickly, but the problem was the exhaust steam still going to the turbine, which is going forward. Now they had valves, they could change all that and send the steam to the condenser instead of to the turbine, but it took time. They didn't have time. So they were done. But turbines were in the early part of the 1900s there. Now, I should tell you and ask you, well, actually I'm going to tell you, you have all seen one of these engines before. You have watched one run. Everybody looks at me, huh? If you saw the Titanic movie, John Cameron, instead of making a model, of a triple expansion engine, he went aboard the other Liberty ship, the Jeremiah O'Brien, which is in San Francisco. They were kind enough to fire up the boilers and run their engine. Of course, the camera crews down there, here and there, all over the place. I was told they took the safety railings off, which are, about waist height, some of them, not all of them, and they put 9-inch tall railings. So when the camera looked at it, it really looks big. Well, I think it is pretty big, but Hollywood, they want it really big. So there's your introduction to a triple expansion steam engine. Now the nice thing about it, I forgot to say this, 12 companies are building them. You could take a part out of the O'Brien's engine or ours, were built by 2 different companies, totally interchangeable. Great concept. This is unloading cargo somewhere in the Pacific. The reason I say that, I'm looking at the palm trees over there. It took time to load, time to unload. When you load the cargo, you drop it down, but this is not the side of the ship. The side of the ship's over here. So now you got to put the stuff all the way down the bottom, and then you got to manhandle it, pack the sides, fill in the middle, and then there's what they call tween deck. You put those boards over, and then you start loading this stuff, but you got to manhandle it to the side. It took time. It wasn't quick. People ask, well, how much cargo could they hold? Now I can razzle-dazzle you with long tons, short tons, all that stuff. I'm going to simplify it and say that the average Liberty ship could carry about 300 boxcars full of stuff. That's a lot of stuff. Now some of the ships were altered later on. They changed the cargo hold dimension a little bit where they could haul airplanes. After the war was over, we hauled steam locomotives over there to rebuild the economies of the people that we beat. I swear we're the only country that does that, but it's the right thing to do. So anyway, how do they get stuff in there? First of all, there's a tarp over this. They take the tarp off. And then there's hatch boards that will fit in there. And then there's I-beams that would drop into that slot. There's the I-beams. Lift all that out, and then you got a straight shot to the sky. And when you get all that out, then you get down below, you do the same thing to get to the bottom of the cargo hold. It took time. These are the living conditions. Now, see, you got to look at detail here. Look at that. They had the air conditioner running. Wow, that was it. The power system on a Liberty was 115 volt direct current. That was it. It had 3 generators. The biggest motor was 7.5 horsepower for the refrigeration unit. Everything else was just, lighting pretty much. The guys that ran it were Merchant Marine. They were civilians. They did have Navy people on there called the Navy Armed Guard. Those are the guys that man the guns. They work pretty good together. The crew size, you might have, let's say, maybe 50, 60 Merchant Marine. You might have 40 or so Armed Guard. It depends on the ship. Now, in our ship was modified. We put a lot of bunks in there because we hauled troops, up to 500 troops. Well, they gave us some extra guns on there. They probably had more Navy Armed Guard as a little protection. But things are tight. Not a lot of room. Rosie the Riveter. Now, let me sneak ahead. Okay, that's good. It's like a Norman Rockwell painting. You can look at the subject matter, but many times it's the background that's the most important. What she's working on, she's doing some welding there. I mean, Rosie the Riveter did welding, did riveting, did you name it, she did it. And if it wasn't for the Rosie the Riveters, we might be speaking a different language today. They made one heck of a contribution to the war effort. Anyway, those are what they call the double bottoms. Now, she's been working on them. Just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. All right, the hull plate, that's the bottom of the ship. That's against the water. The bottom of the cargo hold is this plate here. And in between, they got the ribs. Okay, this is curved, so that would go against the hull. They would actually take the deck plate, flip it upside down, weld the ribs on. In other words, upside down, easier to weld. And then when you're done, ready to put it in, then you flip it over. You put it against the hull plates and weld it or rivet it. Now, our ship had a riveted hull. That created some problems for us later on. You get 5 cargo holds. Number 1, 2, 3, and 4 and 5 behind there. Now, this is what they call the tween deck. In other words, when you come on our ship, you come up the main deck. When you go down to get your breakfast or lunch or whatever, you're on what they call tween deck. It's not the bottom of the cargo hold, it's in between. But again, they would take the hatch covers off, all the beams and everything, and then they would come down here, take the same thing out here, now you got a direct shot. But the point is, when you're loading cargo, you can only swing the cargo over as wide or as forward or toward the stern as that opening. So you had to manhandle this stuff. It took time. Number 2 is the biggest cargo hold. Number 5, it looks big, but you got a hump in the middle. You remember the old cars where you had the hump in the back for the drive shaft? Well, we got the same thing. And the drive shaft is the propeller shaft. So it's not as much room as what you think. Plus it starts to skinny up when you get toward the back of the ship. There's your shaft alley right there. That's what I was talking about. But these things could run wide open 11 knots. Not a big speed. Was that a problem? Not really, because if you're going over in convoy, you can only go as fast as the slowest ship. And in the beginning, if you had a bunch of ships, let's say from World War I era, that could only go 8 knots, guess what? You went 8 knots. Now, as we started building more and more Liberties, they had 2 types of convoys. The one had an S after it, that meant slow. That was for the older ships. And then the Liberties went in a different class. This is the Patrick Henry, first Liberty ship launched in 1941 out of Baltimore. If you got enough room behind you, wide place of water there, you can just launch these things backwards. Let it slide right into the river. They didn't really have what I'd call a name for a Liberty ship, but you remember Patrick Henry, what did he say? What was that famous speech? Give me liberty or give me death. Wow, you guys paid attention in school. That's pretty good. Well, anyway, they thought, well, that's pretty good. I remember Roosevelt making a speech. He was talking about the Liberty ships, and he said, well, these ships will spread liberty throughout the world. And you know what? They really did. Without them, I don't know where we'd be today. So anyway, if you got a nice wide body of water, you can launch them that way, or you can go this way. Now, I'll guarantee you, that would be better than any ride at Hershey Park today. Probably be shorter, but what a ride. And no, they didn't tip over. But there was a yard, I saw a picture, skinny body of water. They had ways on both sides. So they could launch ships this side sideways, on the other side sideways. Now, I don't think I'd want to launch 2 at the same time, but, you know, that's what they did. This is taken out in California. Now, the ship is launched, it's in the water, but it's not done yet. They put it in these outfitting piers, and now they got to finish it. In other words, they got to finish some plumbing work. They have no fuel on board. They got to get that on there. They have no anchor chain or anchors. There's anchor chain right there. Well, the anchor chain goes up through that hole, and then they got like a windlass there. They would pull the anchor chain up and put it down in a chain locker. It sounds simple. It is. The only problem is you need steam from the boiler to run machinery to wind the chain up. Well, if you don't have your boilers fired yet, you can't do it yet. Now, what's interesting, that ship there is under steam. The rest you can't really tell, but it took time. You notice there's no guns in the gun tubs. They got to get them on there yet. It took about 3 days. Can you imagine? We're talking 24 hours a day to get these things done. Now, this ship, Robert Peary, is that the name?
Yeah, Robert Peary.
Whew, boy. Now, I got to tell you, there's 3 shipmates here tonight. There's Bob, Mary, and Paul. Now, they're not here for the lecture. They're here to see if the short, fat guy's going to mess this up, you know. Truth be told, that's it.
Larry, I'm taking notes.
Okay. I was afraid of that.
Great job, Larry.
Anyway, this one was launched in California. They welded their ships out there. It was quicker. Well, quicker, but it presented problems later on. 4 days, 15 and a half hours. I'll say that again. 4 days from when they laid that first plate down, 4 days plus 15 and a half hours later, that was sliding in the water. And then another 3 days to, you know, hook everything up. They did it as a stunt, just to see what they could do. I guarantee you they probably never wanted to do that again because people would be on top of people, a lot of upset people, you know, push, push, push. But they proved that. They made sure at that point Adolf Hitler knew we could build these things faster than he can sink them. That was a goal. But I told that to somebody, they said, well, did it sink? No, it didn't sink. It served.
20 years, I'd say.
Yeah, so, you know, just because they did it quick didn't mean they sacrificed anything. They did the typical good job. Now, you always got the lady on the front there with a bottle of champagne. Now, this cracks me up a little bit. They got speeches and all that. Then she breaks the champagne bottle over the bow of the ship. Okay, that's great. What she doesn't realize, the guys down below are already knocking the wedges and the blocks out. So if she's not done, she better have a real good aim and throw that thing and break it. It's got to be coordinated pretty quick because the guys down below are not going to wait for any kind of order because it takes time to knock everything out. But anyway, hopefully, you know, smash and then whoop, away it goes. Well, okay. This is our ship, the John W. Brown, being launched in Baltimore, September 7th, 1942, Labor Day. They launched this ship and 2 more. Our ship took about a month and a half.
Larry, may I make a statement?
Yes, sir.
Something very interesting. We have a portrait of my grandmother.
Yes.
Actually christening the Rebecca Lukens.
Yeah.
But she was a teetotaler and did not like spirits. So when it was finished, we actually took the bottle out of her hand and put a Bible in her hand.
Hey, whatever works, you know.
I still have that picture.
Oh, man. Month and a half. The average Liberty about a month. California a little bit quicker because they welded them, you know. But this whole deal, they got cranes on either side so they could bring the new hull plates, lay them down there. I mean, once this hit the water, they're starting the next ship. Get it done. No time to waste. But it's amazing. Who's our electrician? Used to work in Bethlehem Fairfield. You know, I'll think of his name. He's still not as active as he used to be. He worked in the shipyard, and he saw some of these launching. But can you imagine working all that time and then actually have the honor of watching one of these things slide in the water? I mean, a lot of times we manufacture things today, but you never get to see the finished product. You're just part of it, you know. There's the finished product. Now, the voyages. The first one was all the way down here, up in the Persian Gulf to help the Russians up in there a little bit. A lot of the others were pretty much over into Italy, Sicily, around there. We were talking about the airplane, the B-25 Mitchell. Now, we say this on the cruise, it's a long shot, but the B-25 Mitchell in our air show spent some time around the Persian Gulf. Same time our ship was there. They said, well, maybe the two saw each other. Well, that's a long shot, but you know, you never know. This is our ship after the 3rd voyage. They didn't really care too much about exterior maintenance. Truth be told, if this ship made 1 trip successfully, they were happy. And in the beginning, I've been told that they would send 3 ships with the identical cargo to wherever they were sending it, figuring, well, if 2 of them get sunk, at least 1 of them will get through. Well, you know, most of them got through. They only lost about, you know, I forget, 211 Liberties, something like that, give or take. That's not bad out of 2,710 that were built. Now, don't get confused with that because they lost a whole ton of merchant ships. I'm talking about the older ships, whatever, not necessarily Liberties. Matter of fact, the Merchant Marine had the highest loss of life of any of the branches of the military. Those guys paid deeply for that, but
About
you know,
30,000
yeah,
civilians.
it's pretty bad. And you know, it's the old saying, the ones that died out in the ocean there, they didn't get a land burial, so there's no tombstone, but basically the white caps are the tombstones of the guys that died. Now, this is a ship in rough water. I don't know where. But what I can tell you is we sent quite a few ships on what they call the Murmansk run, North Atlantic. In other words, head across. It's above England. It's way up there. They have a Russian port. Well, the Russians were hurting, so we're trying to get stuff to them as best we can. And what they discovered, the North Atlantic, and George Mayer wrote this one time. He said there's only one good month in the North Atlantic. The rest of them are terrible. But the seas are rough, and a lot of the welded ships in California, because of the cold water, it stressed the steel, it stressed the weld joints, which already had stress on them. And ironically, a lot of these things were cracking right in the middle. And there's records where one of the mess cooks was coming down into the reefer, which is built into the side of the ship along the hull. He was going to get something out, and he stopped, and he noticed there's water pouring out. Well, the thing was cracking. There's some of them that cracked right in half. That doesn't mean it sinks, because you got, you know, watertight compartments and all that good stuff, but can you imagine the surprise? I was talking to a guy about a month ago, local fella. He was a pharmacist mate on Liberty ships. He was a ship's doctor, and he said one of the ships he was on, he remembers from the bow to the stern, just below the main deck, there was about a 3-foot piece of steel, like a Band-Aid around the thing, both sides. It was riveted on, not welded on. So they put that on there to kind of hold it together. Now, one of the problems they discovered later on is they had a lot of square corners on these ships. Now, don't you like my steel plate? It kind of looks like masonite to me, but, you know, whatever. They made a lot of square corners, especially cargo hold areas. And what they discovered, if you're trying to twist this thing and pull on it, and all these ships twisted, you know, they had to twist. If you're going up or a wave, it wants to break it in half. If you're going the other way, it wants to bend it in the middle. And what would happen, when you put enough stress on there, it would crack right at the corner. It's just a given. That's the way steel does sometimes. So they started changing their approach a little bit. And what they did, same cutout, but they rounded the corner. So now when you round that corner, you're not giving that potential crack anywhere to start. It's like ripping a piece of cloth, you know. If you round it there, it's harder to find a starting point. So what did they do? Well, you know, what you can do, thank God for the jigsaw here, you can take this problem there, put a gusset in there. Sometimes they put a gusset in there that had like pipe around it, give it a little extra strength. But they had to redo some of the liberties and strengthen them and all that. You know, they learned. Sometimes they learn the hard way. But stuff happens. Now, that's our biggest enemy at the beginning, submarine. You know, before we had the blackouts in American cities along the coast, these Germans are having a field day. They could be out there at night, they put up a periscope, and here's all the city lights in the background, and here's a silhouette of a cargo ship, a tanker or something like that. Jeez, there it is. We don't need daylight, there it is. And there was one sub that I think he knocked out, what, 8 or 10 or something, you know, but morning, he just went down the coast and knocked a bunch of them right off. So eventually they got the blackouts in there. The businessmen didn't want it. They said, oh, you're going to ruin our business. We got the nightlife here. Well, you know what? What's more important here? So the blackouts did help. Now, if you didn't have submarines, this is painting, you got air attacks. They can be just as deadly. They had the Navy Armed Guard on there that could try to shoot the planes down. I don't know what the success rate was, but they tried. But at least it gave them something to fight with. They started with convoys. Now, the convoys are supposedly like 300 yards front to back, side to side, whatever. That helped. But later on, the convoys, they had the destroyer escorts that could scoot around pretty quick. They had some planes. They had all kinds of stuff that could look down, and you're looking for that silhouette in the water of that submarine. The other thing they would look for is when they put the periscope up, you saw that silver streak. Well, okay, then you get nervous, say submarine and all that, then everybody, you know, does what they can, but many times it wasn't a periscope. It might have been a dolphin zipping out of the water, and of course that, I guess they were happy because it was just a dolphin, but it made people pretty scary there. But anyway, the convoys helped. Eventually, like I said, they had the slow convoys and the fast convoys and all that, but it helped. This is a painting of a Liberty. Normally, you would not see that smoke unless they were blowing carbon off the tubes down there, which wouldn't last all that long. But these guys, when they got on there, they didn't know where they were going. The only people that knew were two people. It was a radio operator and a captain. And then once they got out there, they might share that with the crew, you know. They didn't want anybody telling where they were going. That old saying, loose lips sink ships. Well, there's some truth to that. You don't tell anybody where you're going, what you're hauling. You just keep your mouth shut and do your job. Now, when I first looked at this, I thought, now, are they loading or unloading? Well, I'm going to tell you they're unloading because when you see the next slide, it fits in better, you know. But they could haul anything and everything. They're unloading these trucks. If you got a pier, that's great. If you don't have a pier, well, now you got to do it this way. These are landing craft on there. You see how that can drop down on the front there. But they can load the stuff on there and then scoot over to the beach. Now, when they had D-Day going on, that was interesting because they had a lot of Liberty ships with all kinds of stuff on there. And as they finally got the beach cleared, then they could radio out to the ship and say, okay, this is what we need now. Well, then they could, you know, pick through the cargo. They could put what they needed in there and then scoot it over. So they had a little control of what came ashore when. Now, that doesn't mean it was totally perfect, but at least they had a chance. Typical Liberty, not a whole lot of deck cargo. I've seen some pictures where if you load the bottom of the cargo hold and then you cover that over, then you load the tween deck and you cover that over, cover your main deck over. If you still don't have room, you load the main deck. And sometimes it's piled up so high, and if you look close, you'll see like it looks like a boardwalk going up and across and then up and across because the Navy Armed Guard had to get to their guns. Well, you can't expect a guy, well, give me a ladder over here, Joe, so he can climb over it. No. You put something, a walkway or something, so they can get to the guns. There's some on the front, some there, some in the back. They had to do their job. I've been told that sometimes the Navy Armed Guard slept fully clothed with their boots on and everything because you never knew when they were going to get called to duty. Now, the war's over. What happens to the ship? Well, it became a school ship in New York City. They taught maritime skills. They taught how to be a steward and do the cooking, how to be a deckhand and handle the lines and all, and handle the cargo, all that sort of thing. Or you could be an engineer and run the engine. It was the only school of its kind in the country. And what was interesting is when they went to that school and they come out of that school, these kids, they had a certificate which was their seaman's papers. They could get a job with any shipping line. Not bad. Now, I showed this to some of our shipmates down there, and you have to understand that some of my shipmates today actually went to high school on this ship in New York. They come down once a year around January for an out-of-town work party. And I said, you know, you guys are lucky. And they said, why is that? I said, well, you can come aboard your high school. I says, me personally, I graduated from Marple Newtown. I can't walk in the door. You guys can't walk into Coatesville High School. You need to get special permission. Ever since 9/11, it all changed. These guys can come down, they can work on their ship, they can joke about it, talk about it, and enjoy it. Now, what the teacher's teaching them, they tell me this is a Pacific fruit ship. Well, they had models. If you're going to do that kind of work, you had to know what for ship you're going to be working on, or at least get educated in a bunch of them. That way, no matter where you got your job, you could fit in and do your job. And of course, they're learning how to handle lines and all that stuff. We used to have that model. It's gone now. But they had different things like that. And they learned their trade. Okay, school's over. Ran from 46 to 82. It sat in New York for a year. It wasn't locked up. They had homeless people living in it. They were stealing brass, anything they could rip off. And this thing really turned into a trash heap real quick. So, our ship is right down there on the end. That's the Arthur M. Haddell. That's the Protector. Now, the Arthur M. Haddell, that's an interesting story. A little bit better picture. School ship, just sitting there, eventually would have been scrapped. Nobody needs it anymore. They tried earnestly in New York City to find a permanent pier for that ship. They were going to restore it up there, same thing as we did in Baltimore. You couldn't find a pier. So it went back in the reserve fleet. Finally in '88, some of our people made some connections here and there, and they found a pier in Baltimore. Baltimore welcomed it. So they said, well, let's take it up to Baltimore and see what we can do. It became Project Liberty Ship there. They got it in '88. They didn't get the engine running till '91. First living history cruise, '91. Now we've got almost 100 under our belt, but it was a long road. Now, the Arthur M. Haddell. That was turned into a cable layer during the war. What's cable layer? Well, they took the rectangular cargo holds and they put some uprights in there to make them either round or elliptical. And over in England, somebody developed a method where they could make flexible pipe, and the ultimate idea was to pump gasoline through it. So what they did, they loaded this thing up in England with all this piping, and then they went from across the English Channel, and they're paying this stuff out. That's why they got that little part on the back there. They got pay that stuff out. It was successful because now we're pumping gasoline from England to France. The Germans never caught on. Now, this is not the only thing. They had other ways of laying pipe across there, but what a concept. Somebody was thinking. After the war, it was also used to lay communication cable, and even after that, rather than fire up the engine and all that, they took the, well, we had taken the rudder off. We have their rudder. They took the prop off the back. They moved this thing around like a barge, but it made a contribution to the war. This is the Protector. Another Liberty that's no longer with us, but the bottom line, what I'm telling you, is we took a bunch of stuff off the Haddell and off the Protector. In other words, when it was a school ship, they got rid of a lot of things like the forecastles, the bedrooms. The woodwork was gone. Some of the doors were gone. The racks were gone. Everything was gone. Well, we got a lot of that stuff off these ships and other ships, even some Victory ships. It's because of their giving things up that we were able to restore our ship. Now, we always tell people, say, well, there's 2 Liberties left. Well, that's a fib. There's actually 3. The Haddell was due to be sunk as an underwater reef. And at the last minute, there were some people in Greece that expressed interest in it. Why? Well, during World War II, the Greek shipping fleet was totally destroyed. They didn't have a rowboat left. Guys like Onassis had nothing. And after the war was over, we had a blue light special on Liberty ships. We sold to the Greeks a whole bunch of ships. Now, Bob, is that your... Want me to get that?
You should. I'm sitting here thinking, that sucker's on, it's going to go off.
Oh, well.
Sorry.
It's like candid camera, when you least expect it, you know. So, anyway, they wanted this ship because we had sold to them at a reasonable price a whole bunch of Liberty ships, and guys like Onassis started in business again with Liberties. They weren't fast, but you know what? It's better than nothing. Eventually, they took the money they earned, the profit, they bought bigger ships. Eventually, the Liberties were scrapped. But what's interesting to me, and I'm on the outside looking in at this picture, that there's still a bunch of old people in Greece that remember what a bunch of hand-me-down Liberty ships meant to them at that time. So anyway, we gave the ship to them. They took it over there, and I'm going to have a handout to give you at the end here. It has some information about it. The bottom line is they towed it over there. It didn't have a rudder because we had taken the rudder. Didn't have a propeller. They sandblasted everything, inside, outside, you named it. Mike Schneider was telling me, he was over there, and he said the captain told them that they even sandblasted down in those double bottoms. Well, there's not a bit of rust on it. They've got it restored. It'll never run again. They have a propeller on it now. They have a rudder on it. They had a little YouTube video of the engine room, and I'm looking at it, I had to laugh because there's things missing. Well, I wonder where they went to, you know. So we had taken a lot of parts. So it'll never run, but they have an opportunity over there. They can share with the young people in Greece the history of what happened in World War II and what liberties meant to them. So there's actually three. Two of them that run, one that doesn't. This is what a ship looked like in '88. I mean, it was a piece of trash, really. Some of the gun tubs, there's no guns. They were gone. They had like a tree growing in one. It just was a mess. A lot of things been stripped from it. The deck's painted red. The hull's painted black. That was school ship. On a Liberty ship, you got a gray hull, you got a gray deck. So we've repainted it to what it should be. The gun tub, that's what they call it there. No gun in it. This stuff, I don't know how to describe what it looks like. I'm going to describe it as like an asphalt that they put on during World War II. And the theory was if you had a bullet or a ricochet or something, instead of bouncing off, this was soft enough that it would just go in there and keep it. It would hold it, so it wouldn't be bouncing all over the place. Along the bridge, well, I can't see it, but there's more of that stuff there and on there. In front of the bridge, all the way across the bridge, you got the same stuff. Now, we had an issue not too long ago. This stuff started coming loose. Well, where are you going to find it? Well, rather than go to the expense of putting something else on there, we had Long Fence Company down in Baltimore. They bought their crew down there. They had a MIG welder. They put like a wire fencing material over that. You don't notice it. Now, if I pointed it out to you, you can't see it in this picture, but when you come on board, if you saw it and I pointed it out, you say, oh yeah, that's what you were talking about, but the average person doesn't see it. You got to do what you got to do. That's a picture of the hull. Isn't that great? You can see a seam there. That's the water line, obviously. I mean, it's sitting on blocks in dry dock. We got the ship, and we wanted to get it to Baltimore. Well, it's not that simple. The Coast Guard controls everything we do because they determine whether it's seaworthy or not. They said, first thing you're going to do is put it in dry dock because you get rivets on there, and we're worried about some of the rivets. Well, they put it in dry dock, and all these leaky rivets look like shower heads underneath. The water just pouring out because they're taking on water. So now we got to deal with that. They had welded over some. They sealed with some kind of sealer over others. They did what they had to do just to get it to be able to sail back to Baltimore. Putting up the Maryland flag, that's Brian Hope. Brian and another fellow were the key people that pushed this thing. Without them, we wouldn't be talking about a Liberty ship. So, and John Boylston was the other guy. Now, they had to put it in dry dock, and I'm jumping back here. They didn't have any money. John Boylston took a mortgage out on his home. That paid for the dry docking. Now, he got his money back, but not right away. He did not tell his wife. Well, it's safe to say they are no longer married right now. But they did what they felt they had to do. So now we got a nice paint job on it. We get some of the rivets sealed. The engine doesn't run. It's frozen yet. And we're going to Baltimore. Now we start the restoration. Now, it looks pretty good. Well, yeah, okay. But when you see the inside, it's a wreck. This was the bridge. And there's some things missing. Notice there's a silhouette right there. Those were the voice tubes, brass voice tubes, where you could shout down to the engine room or back up. Brass, they took them. The engine order telegram would have been there, they took that. The compass was there, they took that. They did not take this.
Tell them it's not heavens.
It's brass. It had about 19,000 coats of paint on there. They didn't know it was brass, so they left it there. So now we get into the restoration. We got the compass back now. Now, see, Bob knows about this stuff because when we're on a cruise, that's his station. He's on the bridge there just talking to people and all that. He makes sure that the people don't mess with that and tell the engine room to do something different. They can steer this thing from down there, or they can uncouple that steering wheel, the ship's wheel, and they got some linkage up to the flying bridge up top so they can actually steer it up there, which is where they like to be. Better view, you can see what you're doing better. So they're putting the engine order telegram in there. There's the other part. They got the compass back. They got this unpainted now. So it's coming along pretty good. This was the cruise mess. Now we're not sure what ship that is. At first, Mike Schneider thought, well, that's the O'Brien. Well, maybe. The key is, look at the heating system along there. We don't have that. We have cast iron radiators. So you say, well, it's not our ship. But yet we have square lighting fixtures. This is going to be a table there. There's a tabletop that would go on there. All these things missing on the floor were chairs that rotate around, you know, that sort of thing. Haven't got them in yet. Anyway, there's a finished product. Now again, we say, well, is that our ship? Well, you got the right radiators, but we don't have a magazine rack there. Well, that could have been put there and taken down. We don't know, but the light fixtures are different, so we don't know. But at this point, it doesn't matter what you're seeing. You get an idea of what's going on there. This was a cruise mess. All these chairs rotate around. They're pretty close together. You got to be careful that you don't break a knee, you know, getting in there and all that and kill somebody else. But that's where we eat. Now I started working on things in the engine room. This is an impeller shaft for one of the pumps. There's the impeller, there's the shaft. Yank that out, send it to a shipyard somewhere, get it worked on. We're working down in the engine room. That's a gate valve that would go down in there to control water from outside. It all had to be worked on. It just took time, but they kept plugging away, This is our galley range. How about that? Coal stove. There's an electric line there. They would have had a blower on there where the guy could keep his coal fire, let's say, banked off. And now he's coming in to do breakfast. Well, he can load some coal in there, turns that fan on, that gives him a nice draft, brings that thing up to temperature pretty quick. Now, you got to realize they baked all the bread. They did all the meals on there. You're talking maybe 100 people you're cooking for. They thought about restoring this thing. When they went to work on it a little bit, it came apart in pieces. So they thought, nuts to that, get rid of it, and they did. Now we have electric ranges in there. If you go out to San Francisco and you ride the O'Brien, they still have their original coal-fired stove. And I've only been on the ship one time, but you could take a chance on dinner for two on the Jeremiah O'Brien, cooked by the captain on the coal stove. And I'm thinking, well, now let's think about this. Well, first of all, can the guy cook? Maybe. But can he cook on a coal stove? A little bit different. So anyway, I didn't take a chance because I had to move on. We were going somewhere else out there. But they still have it. The coal bin was on this side there. They probably had, what would you think, bags of coal or something down below, and then they were...
No, it was up on the boat deck where the generator shack is.
Well, that's
They had
good.
a coal bin, it just, gravity fed down.
Oh, that's good. Better than carrying it up.
Yeah.
That's good. But anyway, that was it. That is our rudder. Swiss cheese. Shipyard says, we're not touching that. That's too far gone. So we took the rudder off of the Arthur M. Hadell. Still got the same prop on there, but that prop has been on and off every time, well, not every time, but usually when we go in dry dock, they'll take the propeller off, they'll pull the tail shaft out, because there's a wooden bearing in there that the shaft rests on. They got to check that. Coast Guard says you got to check it every so many years, whatever. We do what they tell us. There we are, putting the Hadel's rudder up in there. You know, we owe a lot to the Arthur M. Hadel. We really do. But now we're getting that put on. We didn't have any guns. They had been taken off. Now, I'm going to tell you the story the way I kind of heard it here. We used to have a crew member named Richard Bauman. He was an admiral, retired admiral from the Coast Guard. Well, you know what? The man's been around. He had connections. These are the 20 millimeter guns that would have been on a Liberty ship. Well, we didn't have any. Well, he knew where some were, some warehouse somewhere. And from what I was told, he kind of approached somebody. He says, you know what? He said, you need a little extra room here. Now, you can either store these guns in this building here, or we can store them on our Liberty ship. We won't charge you to do that. If you ever need them back, you can have them back. But, you know, we need them. So anyway, that's how they got those guns. Now, on our living history cruise, we fire several of the guns. Now, what am I talking about? Well, they use oxygen, propane. They have an electronic igniter. It's a Hollywood gun. And I asked Joe Colgan. He's in charge of our Navy Armed Guard. Now, Joe is 88. He's up there. He saw action on Liberties, you know, in the Pacific. And I asked him, I said, you know, I realize it's a Hollywood gun. It's just oxygen, propane igniter. I said, how realistic is it? He said, oh, Larry, let me tell you. He said the first cruise in 1991, when they had the Japanese planes come in, he said it took me right back there. He said it took me 12 cruises to realize, you know, we're just putting on a show here. But that's how realistic it was for him. And I often wonder, we have some passengers, some of them Navy Armed Guard, whether they saw action, I don't know. But what does that do to them? You don't know. But sometimes what will happen, they'll see something like that, and then when they finally get home, they start talking to their families about what they went through. Before that, they never talked to anybody. This happens. That's what happens after you ride a Liberty ship thing. And I'm glad they do talk, because if they die, then it's gone with them. This was a big gun. Goes on the back. Do you know the size of that thing?
5-inch 38.
5-inch 38. See, now I sound intelligent here. It was explained to me about the 5-inch is the bore. The 38 takes 38 times 5. Multiply that. That gives you the length of the barrel. See, I'm not as dumb as I look, huh? Anyway, we got that out of Reading, Pennsylvania. A guy named Bob Culp, who was in the contracting business, paving business. He paid to haul that down there. You can come on the ship and see that. This was a gun on the front. And what size is that?
That's a 3-inch 50.
Make something up.
3-inch 30.
Fine, that's good. Perfect. I don't know. I'm not a gunner's mate. That's not my cup of tea. But if you do come on a cruise, we got plenty of gunner's mates that'll just talk your ear off about this stuff, because they're into that. So that goes on the front. We finally got this thing running. They had so many people signed up in 1991 for the first living history cruise, they actually had to add 2. Very well received. Not as good as what we had today. We got more planes today. We got more things. In other words, we were just learning back then. Well, now we got our act together a little bit more. Now, 91. In 1994, they wanted to take our ship over to Normandy for the 50th anniversary of D-Day. The O'Brien in California with a welded hull. They don't have the rivet problem. They wanted to go. Well, they did go. They went all the way down the west coast, through the canal, up the east coast, and across. The Coast Guard said, no, you're not going, because you have too many rivets that are just in bad shape. We're afraid if you get over across that ocean there and you hit a big storm, we may not see you again. So don't even think about it. So in 94, instead, they could go along the coast. They went up to Halifax. Why Halifax? Well, they used to assemble the convoys there. and they'd never been there, so they thought, well, let's go up there, and they did. So 91. Now, let's jump ahead a little bit, year 2000. They still had this rivet problem. And Brian Hope, God bless the man, he was the one pushing for this. He says, you know, every time we get a few rivets replaced, we got to fly the boys from Toledo, Ohio, down to some local shipyard to do the rivets. Now, you got to understand, Toledo Dry Dock is the only shipyard in North and South America that still does riveting. It's a lost art. They still got some business because a lot of the iron ore boats in the Great Lakes had riveted hulls. Well, now they get fresh water. Well, I wish we had fresh water. You know, we wouldn't have the problems we had, but we do. So anyway, they went into Toledo. There it is in the dry dock. 14,000 rivets later, at a cost of almost $1 million, money they did not have, they finally got this problem solved. Now, let's talk about rivets for a second. We got a long one. We got a short one. And this is one that's been cut out with a torch. They told the shipyard workers, save as many of these old ones as you can, because we're going to sell them for $50 a piece as a souvenir. And what they did, they had this poster made up, what we call Brownie. There was an artist that painted this one, and there's another painting out there about taking on fuel to cover the fuel cost to get up into the Great Lakes and get back. So they were asking for donations for the fuel cost and the rivet cost. This was, you got one of these and you got one of them. The bottom line is this: they got out of that dry dock. They did a whole bunch of cruises up there. Now here's still a dry dock. I had to give you an idea. Now there's a guy underneath there. It's high enough you can walk right under. You don't have to worry about it falling down. Rosie the riveter, except she's not riveting. What's she doing? Well, they cut the old rivets out with a torch. In other words, that's dropped out. And they don't want this thing moving or falling apart or anything, so they immediately put bolts in there. She's actually got an air impact wrench that they tighten the bolts with. And the third step, eventually they'll take some of those bolts out, and then they start putting the rivets in. Now, it's from the inside out. This rivet here could rivet a couple hull plates together, 5/8 plate, whatever. You put it from the inside out. They'll get this thing almost like a white-orange color. They'll put it through from the inside. They'll put something to block it, and then the guy has a hammer. He smacks on the hull one time. The guy outside hears that. That tells him, okay, they're ready. So now he takes his rivet gun, and he just kind of works this thing around till it's pretty much flat. We don't need a nice round rivet head sticking out because it drags on the water, you know. We want to have this thing smooth enough so when we come out of dry dock, we get a nice smooth hull, and if they run this thing at 76 RPM, we can have people behind this ship with water skis. Well, not quite. Not quite. Now, this longer rivet, that would go through a couple hull plates plus a rib. But again, it's from the inside out. It takes time to do this. They had crews working around the clock. But they got it done. Now, it's done. I can always tell you that this side of the ship, this is the starboard side, always looks terrible. You notice the tugboat's been bumping up against it with her black bumpers. The other side always looks great. That's where the accommodation ladders are. That's the side that goes against the pier. So the tugboats don't mess with that too much. But this side always looks bad. Here we are in Quebec. They visited all kinds of cities up there in Canada, United States, open for tours, $5 a head, we'll take it. They had living history cruises up there. There's a typical cruise. In other words, get people on there, take a cruise, buy a rivet, whatever, to make some money, because they're hurting. During the cruises, this is up in Canada, I'm assuming, because they're dressed in blues. Pretty cold up there. In Baltimore, everybody's in whites. Although there have been a couple October cruises, they probably wish they had blues. Anyway, we have these fellows there in uniform. We always have a memorial service. We always put a wreath over the side. It's kind of a serious moment. And we not only honor the people that sailed on the Liberties, but we honor any merchant marine Navy people that gave their lives in any war, really. We get that done. Of course, we always get some kind of band or something on there. Always got some singers. Now we're having the Manhattan Dolls. Now, I guarantee you never heard of the Manhattan Dolls. The older people here would remember the Andrews Sisters. People my age would remember the McGuire Sisters. Well, the Manhattan Dolls are the latest thing. There's actually about a dozen of them. When we contract with them, we get 3. They're a trio. They're good. We've had pretty much the same 3 most of the time. They're not, I mean, it's a job for them. It's a gig. They understand that, but they come to like the ship. They like the crew. They know what's expected of them, and they really get into it. I mean, they'll pose with guys, you know, somebody's taking a picture and all that stuff. It's good, and their voices, you got to hear it. You know, they're good. They're really good at what they do. So anyway, 1 o'clock, air show. Now I'm going to tell you, on a good day we'll have 6 planes. Starts out with an observation plane, a little Piper Cub built in '39. Got a lot of plexiglass. Got the pilot facing forward. The other guy in there looking backwards. They could fly over enemy territory, both scoping the enemy out and reporting back and all that stuff. It's not a real fast plane, but it's a start. Now, he'll fly around a little bit, and then he kind of disappears. He climbs. Well, you think he's gone. No, he's not gone at all. He's still there. He is the director of the air show. He's telling the other planes when to come in, when to leave, that sort of thing. These guys used to come in independently. Now they come in together, just like you see here. That is a plane owned by Ken Laird. It was built in 1968 for the movie Tor, Tor, Tor. Ken and 2 other guys had 3 planes for that movie. They bought them. Now, I don't like to talk money with people, but Ken came into the World War II weekend to our information table in the hangar, and he introduced himself. I knew his name because he's in every program we do, and I thanked him for the show that he puts on. It's a good show. And I said, I don't like to talk money, but in a year's time, can you break even with this thing? Well, he started laughing. He said, Larry, a good year for me is if I only had to put $5,000 into it. So what it translates to, the guy has his plane. I'm sure he enjoys flying it, but it's a gift. It's a gift to the world that he can preserve this plane, keep it going to teach people history. History that, you know, it's starting to fade, but it's important to keep it going. The other one was a Russian aerobatic plane during the war. They ordered a canopy to make it look Japanese. It flies out of New England. Aerobatic plane. Now remember, this is after lunch. So now you're sitting there, you're full from lunch, and this guy will fly. I've seen him do loop-de-loops, and I thought, oh my, not a good time to be watching that, but he's good. So anyway, they attack the ship. There's a closer picture of the bow there. And they're close enough, you can see the pilot and everything. Anyway, the Navy Armed Guard will shoot the Hollywood guns. It's embarrassing. It's just embarrassing. They keep missing these things. They haven't downed one yet. Now, I make that comment and somebody says, well, you know, the planes aren't too good either. At least they didn't sink your ship yet. It's, well, okay. All right, I'll take that. But it's pretty realistic. You see people with cameras. Now they got the what do you call those things? The tablet, you know, as it goes by and all that. It's realistic. Our goal on a cruise is to take your brain back to 1944. If you have an open mind about it, we can do that. We can really get you thinking about what these guys went through in the war. The last plane to come in is the Mitchell bomber. Now, I'm not going to ask how low he is. I don't want to know, because if somebody knew how low he was, he'd probably be in jail. They don't, I won't say they're dangerous in what they do, but they're putting on a show. They're not going to risk anything. This thing really ought to have hearing protection. It's a B-25 Mitchell, very loud, very low. He flies around in a figure-8 position. Many passes over the ship. As he goes over, he opens up the bomb bay doors. So you're looking right up inside the thing. This is flown by Russ Strine out of the Mid-Atlantic Air Museum in Reading. They restored that plane up there. They're very proud of that. Now, I'm always at the World War II weekend up there, and of course I got, you know, picture cards and all that, and I went over to the Mid-Atlantic Air Museum information table, and I'm just clowning around. I know it's hard to believe, but I went over there and I said, well, why don't you guys come on a Liberty ship cruise? And she says, we are. Well, they came on the October cruise. They had 2 busloads that came down. The weather was lousy that day. I mean lousy. We had 2 planes come in. So they're expecting to see their plane. We got a radio message say, sorry boys, we're not going to make it. We can't even see the end of the runway in Reading. It's so fogged in. But they understood. And so do our passengers. If we only get 2 planes, they understand. They're disappointed, but you know, I don't see anybody throwing fits or anything like that. It is what it is, you know. We rotate our entertainment. At one time we had Delmas Wood, who played Roosevelt. Now, he's pretty good. This is Adelia B. Craft, who portrays his wife. She's probably 95 now, still kicking. Anyway, she told me that Delmas Wood entered a contest one time to be the best Roosevelt. 70 people, and he won the thing. And she said, what's amazing is in real life, Delmas Wood has a stuttering problem. I've never noticed it. When he does Roosevelt, the way Roosevelt talked, he would do a couple sentences, and then he would pause. And he'd do a couple more, and then he would pause. Those pauses kept him going, where he didn't screw it up. He takes it very seriously. He used to have, maybe still does, an FDR museum down in Silver Spring, Maryland, or something like that. But he takes it seriously. He doesn't want to mess it up because that would be a slap in the face to FDR. MacArthur used to come on board. That's his wife, Linda. That's Brian Woodcock. He lives down in Yorkland, Delaware. He did a good job. I asked him about his pipe. And he gets his pipes made from the same company that made MacArthur's pipes. He found out who they were. He got about 6 of them. And I said, well, what, do you have a pilot light on that thing to keep it lit or something? And he said, no, truth be told, I actually have bourbon in the thing. You know? But always a good sense of humor. Now, this is a picture that tugs at me a little bit. That is Sherry McClung. Sherry portrayed Rosie the Riveter for a long time. It's been almost 4 years we lost Sherry. She had ovarian cancer for 9 years. Couldn't beat it. Couldn't beat it. I went to her memorial service and I met her brother. Her brother told me that where she lived, she had 2 humongous walk-in closets. In those closets were nothing but World War II uniforms that fit her. She could portray anybody she wanted to. She took it very seriously. That was her life. But now we got Patty Gallagher stepped up to the plate and plays Rosie. But she was 61 when she died. You look at the picture, well, she doesn't look at it well. She had short gray hair and she always had a whip. I shouldn't have told you that. Now you know the rest of the story. But she was good. Abbott and Costello, I should point out. When you see them on a cruise, there's 3 of them. 3 of them. Well, the young fellow in the middle is Jason Crutchley. That's Bill Riley. That's Joe Ziegler. Joe lives in Baltimore. Bill Riley drives up from Florida. That's where he lives. Jason Crutchley come out of high school. He worked with a lot of class plays. He became their sound man. Well, they hired him. And then they were talking. They said, you know what? Why don't we take Jason and we'll make him a straight man? Well, I asked Joe Ziegler, I said, what did that do for you? He said, well, you got to understand, Abbott and Costello sometimes had 3. And by adding Jason as that 3rd guy, they can do up to 2 more hours of program. So that was a good move. And plus Jason, he's good. He's good at what he does. They not only look like him, but they sound like him and everything else. I said, you guys always practice? They said, oh yeah, we gotta rehearse before everything. I said, well, why? You know the words. He said, Larry, it's not the words, it's the timing. We got to get the timing perfect. He said, if we screw it up and do a lousy show, then it's a slap in the face to the real Abbott and Costello. Now, this is the Jeremiah O'Brien. How do I know that? Well, you could say, well, Larry, you could probably read the name on the front. Forget the name. Their accommodation ladders are on the starboard side, ours are on the port. So what? Now, this picture was taken in 1994. It seems our ship, you remember 94, we're going up to Halifax. The O'Brien had been to California. They are coming back. We didn't know that. They stopped in South Portland, Maine, which is where that ship was built. So now they're heading home to California. They're coming down the East Coast. We're going north to Halifax. What tipped us off is they were going through the Cape Cod Canal, and the pilot there says, wow, it's going to be quite a day. Can you imagine 2 Liberty ships coming through this canal on the same day? Really? Well, there's only one other one. So they realized the O'Brien's heading south. And lo and behold, it wasn't planned. The last 2 Liberty ships pass each other. Never happen again. The cost of fuel, it just prohibits it. But I suspect there probably wasn't a dry eye on either ship except the engineers that were down below doing their job. I asked Mike Schneider, I said, did the engineers really stay down below, or did they kind of sneak up to get a peek? They did their job. They stayed down below. But never happened again. Here we are coming through the C&D Canal. At first I thought it was a Welland Canal. I said, no, look, there's the Georgia Bridge there. Okay. That's just our crew members on there. We're coming home after the Great Lakes voyage, all that. When they got back from Baltimore, you got to understand, the Great Lakes, getting the rivets changed and all that, is a 3-month voyage. When they got back, it was a couple months later, they were able to sign that final check and send it up to Toledo. They had enough money from the rivets, the campaign, the whole deal. So they lucked out. Now, let's get into this. This is the SS Rebecca Lukens. Now I need to talk about that ship a little bit. What I want to do, I hope I can not screw this up here. Let's see what this does. I'm trying. Okay, this is our website. Now let me make that big there. Ooh. If you come on board our ship in 2 weeks, I want to show you some of the things you're going to see on here. Let's try tween deck number 2. Tween deck, that's halfway down. The first thing you do, you come on a cruise, you go down there and you get your breakfast. Now see, a guy named Bruce Eckert came on board. He took these pictures. Now what it allows me to do, I can click on and I can rotate that around. Now if I really want to make you seasick, I can do it right here. That's our tween deck number 2. Now let me explain. Slow down, Larry. That's looking up. And what they would do, they take those boards out that you see right there. I can use this as a pointer. And then they take the I-beam out. They're sitting in the slots. And then you're looking right up at the sky. And then you come down here. And you take these boards out. And you take these I-beams out. So now you're looking at the sky and you're looking all the way down. So now you start loading your cargo. Now we don't allow people down in the cargo holds. But what we have on our cruises is there's a little viewport right there. And we turn some lights on down below and you can look down through the plexiglass and there's a propeller down there, there's a truck, there's a gun, there's all kinds of stuff. But you get an idea how big this cargo hold is. Now what I wanted to point out to you, I'm going to rotate around. We have a display there of racks, as we call them. You notice they're 5 high. Now notice, see that little hole there? That's a board that's bolted to the steel. There's another one there. This is a touchy mouse, so I don't want to make anybody sick. But when you look around, you see these holes all over the place. There's some there, some there, some there, and then they're all on the other side. That gives you an idea of how many upright posts we have with racks on them. we hold up to 500 troops. So all around number 2 tween deck, there was racks. Now some of them, we took the other side of the ship here and we made it a museum space, okay? There's one for the Navy Armed Guard, one for the Merchant Marine, all that stuff. And it tells about the guys that sailed the ships. Now, if you're coming down there to get your breakfast or lunch, the next thing you do, you go through that watertight door, you're going toward the front of the ship, going forward. And then, when you get there, and we come into tween deck number 1.
You stop at the gift store first.
Well, you know, Mary's right. We do have a gift shop on there. When I'm on cruises or something and it's hot, as they walk past the gift shop, I said, you know, folks, I said, I don't care if you buy anything or not, but you really ought to go in there. Well, what's that? Well, I said, that's our ship store. Even if you don't buy anything, go in there. It's air conditioned. Well, it gets them in there. Well, they probably buy something. You never know. All right, you just come through that watertight door right there. Now you're in tween deck number 1. There is a model of the school ship. There is all the displays right in that corner about the high school it was. Normally on a blue light tour or blue line tour, they come through the chapel, which is right there. There's a display there that they never see. It's called the Checkerboard Crew. And it's all about the ships that were named after black people. Most of them were sailed by black sailors. They have a whole list of names of the ships named after black people. Now, the heavyweights people know, you know, the Harriet Tubman, the George Washington Carver, and all that. And when I point this at the black people, I say, all right, now we have Black History Month every year. I'm going to see if you've been paying attention here. They do pretty good. But there's 5 names on that list that nobody ever heard of. And what they were seamen on Liberty ships, black seamen who were killed in the line of duty, torpedoed, air attack, I don't know. Nobody ever heard of them. But again, on the outside looking in at this picture, they must have been pretty special people because somebody thought enough about those individuals to sponsor their name to get a ship named after them. Ultimate price. Now, all around the bulkheads here, we got builder's plates. They represent ships made in all 18 shipyards, West Coast, East Coast, Gulf ports, whatever. Quite a collection. Now, I'm going to see how sharp your eyes are. There's one right there. That one there. Need some help with that. Can you see if you can read that? No, see, seriously. See if you can read that. That one right there. No good, huh?
Not with these.
No good.
Yeah.
All right, well, all right, I apologize for that. I was afraid that would happen. So what I did, I talked to the captain, and I actually removed that builder's plate and brought it with me. What it is, it's going to be very special to these 2 people in the audience here. It's the original builder's plate. So Rebecca Lukens. Now, her ship, it's all about timing. When her ship was built. I'm going to pass this around. I think I'll give it to the senior Houston first.
This is an honor. Thank you.
That's
Wow.
the real deal.
That is really-
Now, Skip, I got to tell you, I got to warn you now. This is Paul Johnson over here. Paul is our security officer. I brought him along because at some point that builder's plate has to return to the ship, so you can't keep it, you
It's
know.
over here. It's already moving.
Anyway, that's the only thing we have left from her
Thank you.
ship.
That was an honor. I appreciate it.
Well, it's the least I could do.
Appreciate it.
Now, let me see if I can get out of here. And what I'm going to do is go to there, at least try. No, maybe not. Okay, now I'm going to go to this. Okay, now we're going to get specific here with Rebecca Lukens. Her ship came off the line in 1944. All right, what was happening in 44? Well, the European thing was making some success. Pacific had some issues. You remember Pearl Harbor Day, the Japanese, I mean, talk about a can-do attitude. They hit Pearl Harbor, and within a matter of days, they took over the Philippines, they took Guam, they took Saipan, Tinian, all that, part of China. I mean, they thought they could do it all real quick. Well, at some point, we're gaining some momentum, and we're taking these little islands back. And we're stockpiling these islands with bombs and everything else for what they thought would be the final air assault on Japan, the final bombing. Atomic bomb wasn't in the picture yet. They were working on it, but not done. So what they're doing, they got all these landing strips on these islands, and they're landing B-29s, P-51s, whatever, and the planes are breaking down. Well, what do? Where's your repair shops? Where's your machine shops? There aren't any. So what they did, they took 6 Liberty ships. They took the Rebecca Lukens. Paul, this is a good time to hand these out. If you take some on that side, I'll take some on the, because there's some better pictures in here. It was Operation Ivory Soap. Top secret deal. And they needed 6 Liberty ships to pull this off. So they took the SS Rebecca Lukens and they took 5 other ships. Well, you know, if they're under Army Air Corps control, Army control, you know, you're not going to have a ship named after a woman. You need the ship named after a general or something like that. So, what's it? Oh, I don't care. Paul's got the rest of them or whatever. I hope we got enough. Well, we'll have to share. I'm stapling these together. Jim's helping me. I said, well, that ought to be enough. Well, okay. Anyway, they come up with this idea. How about if we take a Liberty ship and we convert it? Now, let me get the best shot first. All right, that is a bow shot of the SS Rebecca Lukens, renamed the Herbert A. Darg. And they refer to these 6 ships as the generals. They also had some smaller ships that looked like an AKL, a small freighter actually. They were called the colonels. And they had a whole bunch of them to support the Liberty ships. Well, what they did, if you look at this picture there, they took the forward mast off. Wow, we got it back. How about that? So far. Oh, what a bunch of honest people here. Anyway, look at the front of that thing and you see a helicopter pad. They had 2 Sikorsky helicopters assigned to this ship. Still got the guns and all that stuff on there. They also had 2 ducks, the amphibious vehicles. And inside that ship, I don't have any pictures here, but it's on that paper, they had complete machine shops. They could repair anything on these planes, from a complete engine overhaul. I'm sure they had a radio shop on there to fix the radios, fix the wings, you name it, they could do it. And they had enough cargo space for all the parts they needed. Now, there's a lot of people on these ships. There's something in there about how many there are, I forget, but a lot. That means you got to berth these people, whatever. So anyway, they used a helicopter to fly the mechanics over to the island. The mechanics could take the parts off the broken planes, bring them back in a helicopter. Some of the pilots they interviewed, they said, well, you know, some of these parts are pretty heavy. What are you going to do? Well, take the door off. So they took some of the doors off just to gain a little bit extra capacity. If they still didn't have enough, they'd get the ducts in there. But it was a great plan, and it worked. Now, a lot of people in Coatesville are probably upset because they changed the name of Rebecca Lukens, but here's a little consolation prize for you. If her ship had to remain a cargo ship, no doubt, it would have made a contribution to the war effort. Well, I got to tell you, in this new condition as an aircraft repair ship, That ship did so much more for the war effort than it ever could have done as a cargo ship. And you say, well, they changed the name. You know what? It's still the Lucans. It's still the Lucans. They can't take that away. They can repaint a name over it. It's still the Lucans. And the fact that she had a ship named after her, hey, that's worth a lot. But anyway, look at this next picture. What they did, they put a lot of portholes on the side. Now that's in the tween deck level. Well, you need some ventilation, maybe a little bit of light coming in. If you're off an island there, you generally got somewhat of a breeze, so that would have helped there a little bit. But anyway, that's what they did with her ship. Now, after the war was over, like a lot of the Liberties, it was eventually scrapped. The only thing we have left is the builder's plate. Everything else is gone. But we have a lot of pictures, things like that. We got the internet. Thank God for the internet. A lot of neat things. But anyway, that was her ship. Now I got one last slide here. It was just in with the rest of them. These guys mean nothing to you. They mean a lot to our ship. That's Gene Airy. He was our first plumber on there. He redid a lot of plumbing lines and everything else just to get the ship seaworthy and everything else. This is John Miner. John Miner was the second chief engineer. He's the guy that probably recklessly got the engine broken free. They got up extra steam. He opened bypass valves. He did everything he thought was possible. And they had everybody down the engine room that day trying to break this engine free. They didn't know what it was going to do. Well, anyway, it broke free. It went 3 revolutions forward. He slammed it into reverse, went 3 revolutions backwards, slammed it into forward again. It's been running ever since. In one of the books we have written about all this, one of the guy's wives called him and said, well, did it run? And the answer was, did you ever see grown men cry? And they did. They worked so hard. Anyway, John had to give it up because his legs were so bad he couldn't make all the steps down and up out of the engine room. So DeLacy Cook took over. Now Cookie was pretty much a boiler man. He had worked on the boilers to get the boilers working right. He knew the engine. These guys have worked on Liberty ships. Cookie, he's the first engineer I knew on there. Cookie passed away at 88. Not a bad run. Anyway, Joe Carpo took over. Joe never wanted to be a chief engineer on the ship. He was content to be the first assistant engineer, which is his next guy down. He was content with it. I'll do anything. Well, then when Cookie passed away, it came on Joe's shoulders. Joe took it on. We had Joe for about a year. And then Joe had cancer and he died. Now these guys paved the way so that we have cruises today. You say, well, who's running it today? We got a training program that's pretty good. Mike Schneider, you've heard me talk about him. He was our chairman of the board for 10 years, 24-year Navy guy, very qualified. He actually wrote a program to teach fire and water tender training for the Liberty ship. And we have had one guy who took this course and he got the bug and he's now at the Merchant Marine Academy at Traverse City, Michigan. And he passed the course. And he has that in his Coast Guard papers where he is a qualified water tender on a Liberty ship. Well, where is that going to take you in the real world? Not too far, but it put him so far ahead in what they're teaching out there. And he was back on the ship during spring break or something, and he brought 2 of his friends with him from the school in Michigan. And they had never seen triple expansion and all that. So anyway, he's teaching them all that. They're really getting into it. In other words, teaching the next generation. That's what it's all about. We've got some good engineers on there. I kind of feel sorry for them a little bit. They work so hard all winter long. They'll be working on the boilers. They'll be working on the engine. They'll be working on all this mechanical stuff. And you figure out how many hours they work all winter, and then you figure how many steaming hours do we have? Well, on a cruise, we run the engine, let's say 8 hours. It's not even that. It's times 4 times a year. Okay, 32 hours. And then there's other times they might fire it up. Like yesterday, they had it fired up just to test that they had Smithsonian group on board.
They didn't come because of the weather, but it was.
Oh, what a bunch of wimps, I tell you. Well, anyway, you know, all these hours, and there really isn't a whole lot of return time-wise. But you know what? When you go on a cruise, you see these guys down there, it's hot. They don't care. They get a chance to play with the toy. And you know, when I say play with a toy, that's the wrong term. They're not playing with it. They run it like it should be run because they don't want to mess this thing up. It's 72 years old. Let's keep it around for another 72 years now. Now, isn't that a stretch? But we'll try. We'll try. But anyway, I wanted to point out something else. We have a Living History cruise coming up in May. That's the first one. Now, I could use your help. My ultimate goal here is to sell cruises. May 24th. Any World War II or Korean vet gets a free cruise. That's our way of saying thank you. We're having trouble finding these guys, so if you know anybody, let us know. Take one of these forms, they can mail it in. Any other veteran of any branch, we don't care. You get $20 off. It's only $120 a ticket. Anybody else, $140. So $140, well, considering you get breakfast, lunch, you get a 60-mile round trip. You can look at the engine. You'll never see that any other place unless you look at the Titanic movie. It's worth the money. Now, let's talk engine a second. I want to go back to here and show you what you're missing if you don't come on a cruise. Now, you can look on our website. They get Facebook on there. And there's one thing there. It's called SS John W. Brown First Bells. Yeah, bear with me here. Now what it is, they're at the pier. The tugboat has pulled the ship away from the pier, and now they're going to ring down from the bridge to go to half speed ahead. So they open up the throttle. Now the engine starts to run. And right after that, you hear the ship's whistle blow because they're pulling out into the channel. So bear with me. That kid's 15 years old. He helps out in the engine. 'More of that. Tough to handle, huh? The way the camera looks up, get an idea how big it is. Four-foot stroke.
What was your speed by that time?
Well, during the war they ran 76 RPM. We don't. We run it usually on a cruise about 60 RPM. That kind of works for us. I'll be honest with you. We used to go below the Bay Bridge, nice and wide down there. We do our air show. What we do anymore, we stay above the bridge. It's still just as wide. But by not going that extra mile or 2 or 3, we save a ton of steam. For us to go a mile, it's a barrel of oil, which is 42 gallons of diesel fuel. And now you get an idea why they get rid of steam. You know, it's expensive. We used to have a Veterans Day cruise in November. We had to stop it. We charged $20 a head, and we raised it to $25. It's not a full cruise, only about 2 hours. We only go below the Key Bridge and come back. We lost $5,000 every time just in fuel costs. What do you do? So now we try this May cruise, and we give the old guys a free cruise, that sort of thing, while we can still attract them. It's expensive. Now I asked Paul, are you prepared for this? I had a cheat sheet I was supposed to give Paul with the cost of our dry docking. He's going to tell you about some of the things we got to do with dry docking. We got to do it every 5 years. Please.
Well, the ship has to meet all Coast Guard regulations like any other ship, and to maintain the Certificate of Inspection, or COI as they call it, requires dry docking every 5 years. 3 years ago, we took it into dry dock, and at that time, we replaced 3 bottom plates, which we knew were bad. And it just so happens that we had about a dozen bottom plates in one of our cargo holds that were donated at one point by Lucans Steel. And we used 3 of those plates 3 years ago. The double bottom area of the ship is filled with a water with a chemical to make it inert so it won't rust. However, there are a couple of voids below the boilers that for some reason they thought best not to use that inert material. So those areas have wasted away over the years from rust, and we've got 5 additional plates that we need to go this year. So this is only 3 years after our previous trip. So we're planning on spending in the neighborhood of $1.1 to $1.3 million on dry docking this October. That's going to include replacing 5 plates on the bottom, of course the associated riveting with that, pulling the propeller, the tail shaft, doing the required maintenance for Coast Guard inspection, and doing the painting in the areas that the crew's not able to do, below the water line and some pretty high areas that the old crew just isn't comfortable climbing anymore. So in addition to that, just the cost to take the ship from Baltimore to the dry dock in Norfolk is going to run about $85,000 for fuel and tugboats at each end. So probably $4,000 or $5,000 for tugboats, but the $80,000 would be just the fuel cost to go up and down the bay. So it's a very expensive project to maintain, and to keep it maintained in sailing condition for everyone to enjoy and appreciate, and to tell the important story of what it did, we've got exponentially increasing maintenance costs. This is a ship that was designed with a lifespan of 10 years, so we're more than 6-fold that already, and we're trying to maintain it and keep it in the foreseeable future as a fully operating ship. So if anybody would like to come on one of our cruises, we'd certainly love to have you. It would be a very interesting and entertaining day. Certainly if you can come down on the 15th of May, visit with us for that day while we're at Clinton Street on the pier, we'd love to have you. And if you'd like to consider a donation for the Dry Dock Fund, we'd be more than happy to receive your payment. As I say, it's a very expensive project, and I spend a lot of time on the ship, but I tell my friends, no matter how much I contribute in a year, it's still cheaper than owning any boat that I could own on my own. So
you can't get the tugboat companies to donate?
They did, but we've seen such an increase in fuel costs over the past number of years. Their fuel costs are their biggest operating costs too. And so they give us a reduced rate. They charge a lot of their time off as training expense. So we're probably paying about half of the going rate for tugs. But you're talking at least 2 tugs, sometimes 3 if there's heavy winds, to handle this ship. These ships were built with a single screw. They were not particularly maneuverable. They were built before side thrusters were designed and developed, and a single screw doesn't handle real well. This is the way they did it in those days.
Is anybody donating the plate?
I'm sorry?
Is the steel plate a big factor? Is anybody donating that?
Well, we have some plate aboard, enough to do the plating now, I believe. I don't know how much we'll have for additional plating in the future. I think we're replacing 5, and I think we still have 8 or so plates in the hold. But certainly that if there's more plate to come, that'll be an important consideration.
What's the thickness of the plate?
I'm sorry?
What's the thickness of the plate?
5/8.
Is it 5/8 down there? Okay. Above the water line, it's 1 1/4. Down there, it's 5/8. And when you look at the steel, when it's in dry dock, if you've never seen a ship of steel this age, it looks like asphalt. very porous asphalt. You wouldn't think it to be steel. It's eroded very unevenly over the years.
It was
and
a
it's just
bad case of
fascinating to see.
acne, huh?
Yeah, it's fascinating to see it. But,
What's the length and the width of the plate?
I believe they're 10 foot, and I believe they're 10 by 20s.
Skip, you should know. You donated these things to us years ago.
I actually think I saw them roll. So, yeah,
Did you?
it's interesting.
Yeah, they're big plates.
Yeah, we rolled those on the 120 mil. That's why you were interested in the 120 mil.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, we'd love to have you come down. And if you'd like to see it in dry dock, you're certainly welcome to come down to Norfolk. We'd be happy to show it to you there. It's a very different perspective looking at a ship resting on blocks and, seeing all of the activity that's going on. So, yes, sir.
I've been on your cruises. Bud Abbott and Lou Costello are funny. And the Andrews sisters sang the songs I remember from World War II. And I worked with Russ up at the Atlantic Air Museum with that B-25. So I've had a lot of fun with you.
There you go.
Well, thank you for your help.
Just one quick question. What's the difference between the Victory ship and the Liberty ship?
The Victory ships were a little bit later designed. The Liberty ships were basically a little bit of a remake on the British design with some changes, but they're a low-pressure steam ship with steam deck machinery, 250 psi steam. The Victory ships, a little bit larger, 18 knot service speed. They were turbine, 450 psi, high-pressure steam, turbine powered with electric deck machinery.
Any of those around?
Yeah, there's the American Victory in Tampa, there's a Red Oak Victory, and the American Victory are both in California.
The Lane Victory's a San
And a Lane Victory, yeah. So there's several of them, and they still sell them occasionally too. Although I think of all the historic ships that sail, the John W. Brown probably sails more than most.
There you go.
And we visited every port on the East Coast where Liberty ships were built during the war, from Jacksonville to Portland.
Wow.
So it's been an interesting experience.
Thank you.
What shipyard was the Brown building?
I'm sorry?
Baltimore.
What ship?
Baltimore. Bethlehem, Fairfield. We go past it every
Sparrow-
cruise. There's
Sparrow
nothing
Point?
left.
Sparrows Point, yeah.
I forgot to tell you my woman's story. And this didn't happen overnight, but I happened to be walking around one day and then I saw the Rebecca Lukens builder's plate. I thought, wow, that's interesting. Anyway, Sam made me this. I had an old picture. There was something off the computer. It was okay. This is much better. So if I'm in #1 tween deck where I really like to do my docent work, if I see a bunch of women come through, I'll approach them and say, do you have time for a woman's story? They're easy. Sure, they say. So anyway, they come over. I got a laser pointer. I point out the builder's plate up on the bulkhead. And I said, who is she? Well, here she is. I had one woman says, wow, she's kind of cute. Hey, whatever, And I said, well, born 1794, died in 1854. I explained about the Brandywine roller mill being water powered and all that stuff. But at some point, they decided to borrow a ton of money, improve the mill, bring it up to modern standards and all that, improve it. And then I explained about her husband passing away, but on the deathbed, keep it running, pay off this loan and everything, or guys need their jobs. She had already at some point, lost 2 kids, expecting a 6th child. I mean, talk about heartbreak all at one time. There it was. She kept on going. And I go on to explain to the women, I said she did the expansion and then many more. At some point, she got the next generation involved, and she explained to the kids in simple terms, not her exact words, but she would have said something to the effect, let me teach you the ethics of good business. Put out a good product at a fair price. Don't ever rip anybody off. And she didn't. Next generation, right on, that was the key. That's why Lucans Steel became what they were. Well, I go on to explain about the 206 mill, biggest mill on the planet. And then I get into the end of World War II, although they didn't know that, about building battleships down Philadelphia, about the inner hull plate, 12-inch thick. And I'm sure more than one of those plates was rolled at Lucans. And Scott tipped me off. I just heard a conversation where he said there was written records where when some of those plates arrived at the Navy Yard, they were still hot. Get it done. Don't mess around. Get it done. Well, then I said this whole story about Rebecca Lukens is personal to our ship. I have a photograph that a friend of mine took of the bronze plate on the port side boiler. Now, they both have plates on there. The starboard side is very hard to read, but this one isn't too bad. What it says is our boilers are built according to the drawings and design of Babcock and Wilcox. Well, who were they? They were a big boiler company. They knew how to make boilers better than anybody else. But you know what? They might have been big, but they couldn't build them all. So the government contracted with Edgemore Iron Works, Edgemore, Delaware, just a stone's throw above Wilmington. They built a lot of Liberty ships boilers. So here it is for the John W. Brown. That's us. Next line is credit. Steel by Lucans Steel. So all because of what she started back then, we have steel in our boilers that make the steam, that run our engine, and push us through the water. And then I start looking down at their feet. They probably think I have a foot fetish, but I don't. So I'm looking down at their feet. I said, I notice your shoes are dry today. They're dry because we are floating on hull plates made by Lucans Steel. You know, I get mixed reaction to that. Well, I get mixed reaction to that. I really should have a box of hankies there because I've seen more than one woman with tears. It's like, you know, she's one of us or something. I don't know what they're thinking, but, you know, good for that. I had one woman, beautiful face, but the face changed, turned into a scowl. She's looking at me like a pit bull, and she starts wagging her finger. She's right there, right there. There's proof positive. If you want something done and you want it done right, you get a woman to do it. I couldn't argue with that. I spent a lot of years in the scouting program. A lot of my committee members were women. I had a committee chairperson, took me a long time to get that word right, who was a woman. And if I look at the volunteers on our ship, there's a volunteer backbone. Backbone is made of individual vertebrae. Many of our volunteer vertebrae are comprised of women. They don't get all the credit they should deserve, but many a time those women-type vertebrae are the strongest ones we got. We need everybody on there, but I refer to all of them as the sweethearts of the John W. Brown, and no, that's not sexual harassment. It's just, it's the truth. It's the truth. Does anybody have any questions? Uh-oh, Mary. Help!
From a volunteer perspective, which is a little different than all the technical perspective you've just heard. About 5 years ago, Larry had me with, do you want to hear a woman's story? As we're walking around the tween deck. And I remember distinctly, he pointed out different builder plates, and I remember him telling this long story about the Rebecca Lukens. And Bob and I had been on 4 paid cruises over a few year time. We were just like kind of getting hooked on the story about the Liberty ships, and I was born in 1944, and my father was stateside worker. He wasn't in the military, and he was dead. I knew he would absolutely love to be working as a volunteer on the John Brown. Anyway, this day that Bob and I met Larry, and we're hearing about the Rebecca Lukens, and all, that's the day that we signed up to be volunteers. And we have thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm not military, but I remember at the first meeting, Mike Snyder talked about what it meant to be a shipmate. I'm a sailor, I've been around boats, I'm from Minnesota, been around lakes, but I never really understood what the word shipmate meant. And I can honestly say that within a very short period of time, it became very clear to me what that word means on the John Brown. Everybody is a volunteer on board. Everybody's a volunteer. Nobody's paid staff. Everybody has everybody else's back. Everybody does what needs to be done. I don't have Coast Guard credentials. I never will. I don't want to go through firefighting or anything. But I can sell raffle tickets. I can do some office work. I can work in the gift store. I work in the galley making meals. I can hand out programs. Most of all, I enjoy talking to everybody who's on the trip. And I have heard some remarkable stories, like you were describing, remarkable stories where family members are hearing for the very first time the stories about their grandfather or father who had served during World War II. And the families are so thankful that we are creating this reenactment of 1944, and people are having that opportunity to kind of relive, get reconnected with something. We have a chaplain on board, and the chaplain hears many of these stories on every trip. A lot of people just need to get the story out, get some tears out, and get on with it. But as a volunteer, I can say it's a very, very rewarding experience with a great group of people.
Thank you. I'm going to end it with one quick story. A quick story from me. Well, I'll try. I was on a ship one day doing some welding on the deck, and here this fella, he looked kind of oriental. He's ringing the doorbell at the top of the gate. So I open up, let him on. His name was Bill Wall. He was from Colorado, Grand Junction. Well, I've been to Colorado. I know Grand Junction. We got talking. Well, his wife was with him. She was from the Philippines. I had the son with him. And if I see somebody with a foreign accent or something, I don't have a problem with it. I said, Bill, where are you from? And he said, oh, I'm from Rochester. Well, it wasn't exactly what I was looking for, but that's okay. His wife is holding this box. They had made contact with a ship. What it was the cremains of his father. And at some point after this next dry docking, we're going to go out in the ocean. Right now we can't because of the hull plates. We got about, I'm guessing 20 people right now that are waiting to be buried at sea. Many of them are our shipmates who have passed on. So they're going to have to get done at Norfolk, scoot on out, have a big ceremony, and get it done. So anyway, he dropped the cremains off so that next time the Brown goes in the ocean, they could bury his father. And I said, well, tell me about your dad, Bill. Well, here, the man was an engineer in the Merchant Marine, sailed on a lot of Liberty ships, worked in the engine room. So I was asked to give him a tour, so I gave him a tour, spent a lot of time in the engine room, showed him cargo hold number 3 and all that stuff, and he was fascinated. So now I get him back up near the ship's office, and Joanne was going to take over from there and work out the details on getting this guy buried at sea. And she said, Larry, are you done? I said, give me another couple minutes here. And I said, Bill, I said, I refuse to talk money with people. I don't know what you're worth. But I said, if you and your family could spring for 3 airline tickets and come back in from Colorado and come on one of our cruises, I said, I promise you, I will pair you up with one of our best engineers, and you can spend whatever time you need with him, and he can explain maybe some of the things your dad would have done down the engine room. Well, we shook hands, and I thought that was the end of it, but little did we know, and I didn't ask for this, but the man left, he left a $1,000 donation check. So I guess that means maybe he can afford airline tickets. I don't know. I don't know if he'll come back or not, but this is the type of people we run into. You never know what effect it'll have. I hope they do come back. Because I said, what it'll do, it's not going to help your dad. He's gone. And incidentally, there was only half of them in that box. They had scattered half the ashes somewhere else, so now we got half a box of cremains. But I said, it's not going to help your dad, but it may help to bring a little closure for you. I hope he takes us up on that, but we'll see. but we run into all kinds of people. I'm going to cut it off here because otherwise I have to pass that no-dose to everybody. Does anybody have any questions? I mean, we're open to anything. And if we don't have any answer, look, there's 4 of us here. We'll make something up. You know. Yes, sir.
Don't call me sir.
Yeah, but you got the silver beaver. I have to.
That's true. When people come down to volunteer, do they stay on the ship?
Well, generally our volunteer days are Wednesdays and Saturdays. A lot of the people come on there 6:30, 7:30 in the morning. Usually by 2 o'clock. You know, these guys are old enough. They're ready to go home, and they do.
I know they're old like you.
That's right. That's right. Anyway, if we have an out-of-town work party come down in January over Martin Luther King weekend, those guys drive all the way down from New York. Yeah, they stay overnight. Some of the guys do. You know, it's not a problem.
Sometimes we do spend overnight. I drive about 100 miles, so occasionally I'll go down like on a Tuesday, work Tuesday and then Wednesday and come home, or Friday and do Saturday.
But you can't stay on the ship at that time, or you stay on
Well,
the
you
ship?
gotta have the proper credentials. Again, for Coast Guard regulations, you need a quick card and Coast Guard documentation and all that, or someone aboard who has that.
Yeah. You know, there's 3 things with a common denominator here. I look at Ken Laird and his plane. Had to put $5 grand in. I look at our Liberty ship. We don't make all this money on living history cruises. It helps, but it's not the whole picture. So again, it's donations, it's ship store sales, it's, you know, 50-50 drawing. It goes on and on and on. And then I look at the National Iron and Steel Heritage Museum. Basically, all 3 of these things, it's an uphill grade all the way. You guys right now, at this museum, you're where we were in '91. We had a frozen engine that didn't run. The key for us is to get the engine running. The key for you is going to be the 120 mil. Get that, now you can complete your picture here. But, you know, it's one of those deals where you'll never, ever really make a profit on this deal. You're relying on donations, everything else. I mean, we asked for $5 donation for a tour. What's that pay for? Not a whole lot. It's a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit whatever. I mean, they charge, Skip, what do you charge? $5 for a tour here? Now, granted, you got volunteer docents and all that. That's fine, but it's all uphill. And what it translates to at the end of the day, between the airplane and the Liberty ship and this museum here, it's a gift to the world. You're sharing history. You're talking about what happened and what was and what will be. It's a gift. And that's the only way you can possibly look at it. It makes it easier that way. But anyway, thank God for volunteers and all that to keep all this running. Thank God for Ken Laird. Thank God for what you guys are doing here. I've had so much help from Sam, from Juliet, from Jim, everybody here setting this up, because I'm not really computer savvy, but they made it so easy. And as I said, it's a privilege for me to come down here. I've enjoyed it, but I'm going to stick around a little bit. If you got any questions about anything, I'd love to talk with you.
We thank you very much for coming and making.
No problem. Oh, stop. You're welcome. You're welcome. See, now all you got to do is pack up.